The cowboy's promise of purity shattered when his bride took control the first night. Jacob had always felt a deep connection to the wide, open plains of Texas. The vast fields, stretching as far as the eye could see, were more than land to him. They were freedom, tradition, and a place where life moved at its own slow, honest pace. He grew up on his family's ranch, learning to ride horses before he could even walk steadily, to mend fences before he fully understood the cost of hard work, and to respect the code of life his father and grandfather had lived by. In their eyes, a man's word was his bond, and purity, both of heart and intention, was a virtue to be protected fiercely. Jacob had always taken these lessons seriously. He believed in living a life of integrity, honoring promises, and keeping his personal values intact. In his mind, the future had a clear path. He would marry a woman who shared these beliefs, someone who respected tradition, family, and the quiet rhythms of ranch life. It wasn't just about finding a partner. It was about finding someone who would fit seamlessly into the life he had been raised to cherish. When he first saw Clara at the town's annual harvest festival, he felt something he hadn't expected. She wasn't a woman from his small circle or his family's social gatherings. She was lively, with a sparkle in her eyes and a smile that seemed to carry a secret. Clara was working at a small food stall, handing out homemade pies and drinks to children and neighbors alike. Her laughter carried over the crowd, warm and inviting, and Jacob couldn't help but watch her from across the festival grounds. At first, he told himself it was just curiosity, the natural interest of a young man who hadn't yet met someone like her. But as the day went on, he realized he was drawn to more than just her beauty. Clara moved with confidence, spoke with a clarity of thought that surprised him, and treated everyone she met with kindness and respect. She didn't demand attention, yet she had it naturally. That balance of strength and grace fascinated Jacob. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more often than chance would allow. At first, they spoke in passing, a nod at the general store, a polite greeting by the town well. Then, conversations began to stretch longer. Jacob discovered that Clara loved horses as much as he did, and had grown up learning to ride across the hills near her family home. They shared stories of childhood adventures, of animals they had cared for, and of dreams they harbored quietly in their hearts. Jacob found himself looking forward to every meeting, every word exchanged. He admired Clara's independence, her laughter, and her sharp sense of observation. Yet he also began to notice something deeper. Clara had a sense of self he had never encountered before. She wasn't molded by anyone's expectations, nor did she seem to follow traditions simply because they existed. There was a spark in her, a will of her own that intrigued and slightly unnerved him. Despite this, Jacob imagined a life together that mirrored his ideals. He pictured them on his family's ranch, living simply, respecting the land, and following the values he had been raised with. In his dreams, she was by his side as a loving and supportive wife, someone who would honor the commitments he held sacred. He began to consider her not just a companion, but the woman he would marry, the one who would share in all of life's responsibilities and joys. Clara, too, was aware of Jacob's attentions. She found him earnest, steady, and respectful, qualities that were rare and appealing. She appreciated his patience and the way he listened to her, giving weight to her opinions and stories. Yet, she also sensed Jacob's strict adherence to rules and ideals, the invisible walls he had built around his life. Clara had her own dreams and desires, ones that didn't always fit neatly into the patterns of tradition. She was independent, confident, and thoughtful in a way that challenged the conventional expectations of women in the town. Despite their differences, they were drawn together. It wasn't an explosive romance. It was gradual, built on small gestures, shared moments, and the understanding that each found in the other something they had been missing. Jacob's admiration for her confidence grew alongside his longing for a shared future. Clara's respect for his integrity grew alongside her curiosity about the man who lived so closely to his principles. Months passed, and their bond deepened. They spent long afternoons riding along the river, their horses' hooves echoing against the soft earth. They shared quiet dinners under the stars, talking about everything from their childhood memories to hopes for the future. The world seemed simpler when they were together, but also more vivid, filled with subtle complexities that neither had fully realized before. When Jacob finally asked Clara to marry him, it felt like the natural next step. He chose a small wooden bridge near the edge of the town, where wildflowers grew in clusters and the river sparkled in the afternoon sun. Clara's eyes lit up with surprise and joy as he knelt, his heart pounding in his chest. She didn't hesitate, and in her acceptance, Jacob felt the world align exactly as he had imagined it. The wedding was a modest affair, held in the town's small chapel. Family and friends gathered to celebrate, and the atmosphere was filled with warmth, laughter, and gentle tears of happiness. Jacob watched Clara walk down the aisle, her face radiant, and felt a mixture of pride, love, and nervous anticipation. Here she was, the woman he had chosen to share his life with, standing before him with trust and commitment reflected in her eyes. That evening, as they rode back to his ranch, Jacob's mind wandered to the first night ahead. He had imagined it countless times in moments of quiet reflection and held it close as a sacred part of their union. In his imagination, it was a night of shared vulnerability, trust, and love, where he would guide and protect, and she would honor the vows they had made. The weight of tradition and personal expectation pressed on him, and he felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The ranch was quiet, the stars stretched endlessly across the sky, and the familiar sounds of the wind rustling through the grass offered a comforting backdrop. Jacob led Clara to the house, unlocking the door and guiding her through the familiar rooms filled with memories of his upbringing. Every detail felt significant: the wooden floors, the soft glow of lantern light, the familiar smell of hay and old timber. It was more than a home. It was a reflection of his life, and soon it would be a shared space for both of them. Clara looked around with curiosity and appreciation, noting the care Jacob had put into maintaining the place. She smiled at him, and in that moment, Jacob felt a profound sense of connection. He believed everything was unfolding exactly as it should, that the life he had built and the dreams he had nurtured were coming together perfectly. Yet, even as he led her toward the room that would mark the beginning of their married life, he couldn't help but sense that Clara's presence carried a quiet strength that he had not yet fully understood. As they entered the bedroom, Jacob's mind raced with anticipation. He imagined the rituals of love and commitment he had been taught to uphold, the careful attention to detail, and the solemnity of the moment. He had prepared himself to lead, to ensure that everything happened in a way that honored both tradition and personal ideals. The air was thick with expectation, a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and reverence. But even in this moment of imagined control, Jacob noticed a subtle shift in Clara's demeanor. Her gaze was steady, her posture confident, and there was a spark of independence in her expression that he had admired, but had not expected to encounter so fully in such an intimate setting. She moved with intention, as if aware of her own power and choices, and Jacob felt an unfamiliar tension rising within him. He paused, trying to reconcile his long-held dreams with the reality of the woman before him. Clara was no longer just the charming figure at the festival, or the attentive companion on horseback rides. She was real, present, and fully herself, a combination of kindness, strength, and independence that challenged the neat narrative he had imagined for their first night together. As he looked at her, Jacob realized that the life he had dreamed of was not entirely under his control. The ideals he had cherished were confronting a living, breathing person with her own will, desires, and understanding. For the first time, he felt the tension between tradition and reality, between expectation and authenticity. That night, as they prepared for the moments ahead, Jacob held onto one thought: love was not only about control, ritual, or adherence to ideals. It was also about trust, respect, and the willingness to embrace the unexpected. And though he didn't yet understand how that truth would unfold, he sensed that the journey of marriage would be far more complex, challenging, and rewarding than he had ever imagined. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the ranch bathed in the gentle glow of twilight. Jacob and Clara sat together on the edge of the bed, hands intertwined, hearts pounding, and minds full of anticipation. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, a reminder of freedom, possibility, and the unknown. And inside, Jacob felt the first tremors of change, an awakening that would test his beliefs, expand his understanding, and mark the true beginning of their shared life. Jacob had imagined that the first night of their marriage would unfold according to every plan he had carefully envisioned. In his mind, it was a moment of perfect harmony: soft candlelight, whispered words of love, and a quiet reverence as they began their life together. But reality, as it often does, had a way of challenging expectations. As the room grew quiet under the soft glow of the lanterns, Jacob noticed a subtle shift in Clara. She seemed calm and composed, her gaze steady and alert, as if she were fully aware of the significance of the moment, and also fully aware of herself. Jacob had expected nervousness, perhaps a shy hesitation, but Clara carried none of that. Instead, there was a quiet confidence that unsettled him in a way he had never experienced before. At first, he tried to follow the patterns of his imagination. He guided her gently to the chairs by the window, hoping to ease into conversation, perhaps share a quiet toast to their new life. He spoke softly, choosing his words with care, expressing how much he had looked forward to this day, how much he admired her, and how he hoped they could face the future together. Clara listened attentively, nodding and smiling, but she responded in a way that subtly reminded him that she was not merely an observer in his carefully crafted plan. She was an active participant, fully present and with her own mind. When Jacob reached for her hand, expecting the gentle compliance of a partner following his lead, he felt her fingers tighten around his instead of relaxing. She leaned in slightly, not in submission, but in a gesture of mutual understanding, asserting her presence without confrontation. It was a small action, but it carried weight. Jacob's heart raced as he realized that the first night, as he had imagined it, was not going to be entirely his to control. Clara's calm self-assurance demanded that he acknowledge her as an equal, a person with her own desires and agency. The conversation that followed was careful, thoughtful, and at times awkward. Jacob asked questions, seeking to understand how she felt, what she hoped for, and what mattered to her most in this moment of intimacy and connection. Clara answered honestly, speaking with clarity and warmth, but also with conviction. She spoke of her hopes for the future, her appreciation for the life they were beginning together, and her need for mutual respect and understanding. Jacob felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Relief because Clara's honesty and clarity reassured him that she cared deeply and genuinely about their bond. Confusion because her independence and willingness to express her own needs challenged the rigid framework he had carried in his mind for so long. He realized that the life he had imagined, one where he could guide every moment, shape every experience according to tradition, was not entirely possible. Clara was not an idealized figure from his imagination. She was a real, thoughtful, and independent human being. As the night progressed, Jacob found himself listening more than speaking, observing more than directing. He noticed the small ways Clara expressed herself, the way she adjusted the blankets to make them comfortable, the careful way she moved about the room, and the gentle attention she gave to ensuring that both of them felt at ease. These were not actions of defiance, but of confidence and consideration. Jacob began to appreciate her presence in a new light, not as someone to fit into his plans, but as someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered just as much as his own. There was a moment when Jacob realized how much his own expectations had shaped his imagination. He had spent years preparing for a night that could only exist in dreams and ideals, and now he faced the truth of human connection. It was unpredictable, reciprocal, and full of nuance. Clara's assertiveness was not a challenge to his love or loyalty. It was a reflection of her personality, her upbringing, and her understanding of partnership. Accepting that was difficult but necessary. They talked about their childhoods, their experiences growing up in different families, and the lessons that had shaped them. Jacob spoke of the ranch, of early mornings in the saddle, of the responsibility of caring for land and livestock. Clara shared her experiences helping her family, learning independence, and navigating the world with her own sense of purpose. Through these conversations, Jacob began to see that marriage was not just a continuation of familiar routines. It was an opportunity for growth, compromise, and learning from each other. At one point, Jacob felt an unexpected surge of gratitude. He realized that Clara's strength did not diminish his own. It enhanced their connection. Her presence challenged him to be more thoughtful, more patient, and more attuned to the realities of partnership. In acknowledging her independence, he discovered a new form of intimacy, one built not on control, but on mutual respect and understanding. The hours passed quietly but meaningfully. They shared laughter over small stories, recalled memories from their youth, and spoke of the dreams they held for the future. Jacob noticed the softness in Clara's expressions when she spoke of her hopes, the brightness in her eyes when she laughed, and the calm certainty in her demeanor that made him feel safe and grounded. It was different from the fantasies he had built in his mind, yet richer, fuller, and more profound. Jacob also reflected on his own feelings. He realized that much of the pressure he had placed on the first night came from fear. The fear of the unknown, fear of not meeting expectations, and fear of stepping into a partnership without complete control. Clara's confidence and honesty provided a mirror, showing him that fear was natural but could be tempered by openness, communication, and trust. He began to understand that love was not about dominance or tradition alone. It was about embracing the unpredictability of human relationships with patience and empathy. Throughout the night, Clara continued to express herself in ways that were gentle but assertive. She guided conversations, made thoughtful suggestions, and shared insights that encouraged Jacob to think beyond his familiar patterns. He found himself responding not with resistance, but with curiosity and engagement. In those moments, he discovered the joy of shared decision-making, the comfort of mutual understanding, and the depth of connection that comes from seeing a partner fully and honestly. By the early hours of the morning, Jacob felt a sense of calm he had not anticipated. The initial tension, the fear of the unknown, and the weight of expectations had given way to a feeling of shared presence. He realized that the night had not unfolded as he had imagined, but it had provided something far more valuable: clarity, understanding, and a foundation for trust. Clara had shown him that partnership required flexibility, attentiveness, and respect for each other's individuality. As dawn approached, the ranch was bathed in soft light. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of a new day. Jacob and Clara sat together in quiet contemplation, hands still intertwined, hearts open, and minds aligned in a new understanding. They had faced the unexpected together and had navigated it with patience, honesty, and care. Jacob felt a profound sense of gratitude. He realized that the first night was never about control or perfection. It was about connection, mutual respect, and the willingness to embrace one another fully. Clara's presence, her confidence, and her honesty had challenged him, but in doing so, she had strengthened their bond. He understood that marriage was not the fulfillment of a fantasy, but the beginning of a shared journey, one that required compromise, empathy, and unwavering attention to each other's humanity. As the sun rose over the plains, casting golden light across the fields, Jacob and Clara prepared for the day ahead. There was a sense of quiet triumph in their shared smiles, a recognition that the first night had been a lesson in love, patience, and understanding. Jacob felt a renewed commitment to embrace Clara not as an ideal, but as the real, complex, and extraordinary woman she was. In those early hours, Jacob learned a truth that would guide their marriage. Love was not about control, expectations, or adherence to tradition alone. It was about presence, attentiveness, and the courage to face the unexpected with trust and openness. Clara had not diminished his ideals. She had enriched them, showing him that partnership was a balance of respect, individuality, and shared growth. The first night was not the culmination of Jacob's dreams. It was the beginning of a deeper, more meaningful journey. And as they watched the sun rise together, he felt a quiet certainty that their life together would be full of challenges, joys, and discoveries. But most importantly, it would be built on a foundation of honesty, respect, and love, a bond that neither fear nor expectation could shake. And in that moment, Jacob realized something else. Sometimes, the moments that challenge our expectations are the very ones that teach us the most. The first night of their marriage had not gone as he imagined, but it had gone exactly as it needed to. The morning sun filtered through the wooden blinds, casting soft lines across the floor of the small ranch bedroom. Jacob awoke slowly, feeling the quiet stillness of the house around him. The night had been long, filled with conversations, unspoken tension, and the subtle but unmistakable realization that life, married life in particular, was far more complex than he had imagined. He sat up, staring at the wooden ceiling, his mind still swirling with the events of the night before. Every detail seemed vivid, every glance, every word, every movement of Clara's hands replaying in his memory. For years, he had imagined the first night of marriage as a carefully orchestrated moment, a culmination of dreams, traditions, and ideals he had held since childhood. But reality had been different. Clara had not followed his imagined script. She had been herself, confident, assertive, and unafraid to express her own thoughts and needs. At first, Jacob had felt confusion. He had tried to guide the evening according to the ideals he had held so firmly. But Clara's quiet strength and clarity had unsettled him, forcing him to confront something he had avoided for years: the fact that life and love was not fully under his control. He realized that his expectations, though well-meaning, were rigid, and that they did not leave room for the nuances of a real partnership. Jacob rose from the bed and walked to the window, looking out over the ranch. The fields stretched endlessly, bathed in golden morning light, and for a moment he felt the comforting familiarity of the land he had known all his life. Yet, even the open plains, which had always symbolized freedom and clarity to him, now seemed to hold new meanings. They reminded him that life could not always be predicted, planned, or controlled, and that sometimes the unexpected held the greatest lessons. He thought about Clara. Her presence in his life was no longer a simple addition to his world. She was a force, quiet but undeniable, reshaping the way he thought about love, partnership, and respect. Jacob realized that the unease he had felt during the night was not discomfort from change, but an awakening to a truth he had long avoided. A successful marriage required equality, attentiveness, and flexibility. He had been raised to see the first night as a ritual of tradition, but Clara had shown him that love was not a ritual. It was a living, breathing exchange of trust and understanding. As he reflected, Jacob remembered the small moments that had struck him most during the night. The way Clara had moved with purpose, adjusting the room to make them both comfortable. The way she had spoken her mind gently but firmly, expressing her hopes and feelings without hesitation. The way she had listened, truly listened, when he shared his own insecurities and fears. Each of these moments had seemed simple on the surface, yet together they had reshaped his understanding of intimacy and connection. Jacob took a deep breath and leaned against the window frame, allowing himself to fully acknowledge his emotions. He felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and humility. Clara had challenged him, not out of defiance, but out of honesty and self-respect. And in doing so, she had revealed to him the depth and complexity of real love. It was a love that required courage. The courage to be vulnerable, the courage to face discomfort, and the courage to recognize and embrace the strength of another person. He began to think about his own role in the partnership. For so long, Jacob had believed that love meant protection, guidance, and adherence to tradition. But he realized that these ideals, while noble, could also be limiting if applied without flexibility. True partnership required a balance between giving and receiving, leading and listening, asserting and yielding. The night had shown him that Clara was not an obstacle to his ideals, but a mirror reflecting the possibilities of growth and understanding. As the hours passed, Jacob continued to reflect, moving through the quiet house and observing the details that had always comforted him. The wooden floors, worn smooth by generations of footsteps, reminded him of the continuity of life and family. The faint smell of hay carried memories of childhood mornings and lessons learned at his father's side. And yet, these familiar elements now seemed infused with new meaning. They were no longer just symbols of tradition. They were part of a shared world he would build with Clara, a world that could accommodate both history and change. Jacob's thoughts eventually turned to the concept of purity, an idea that had shaped much of his life and expectations. He had always believed that love, especially in marriage, was tied to adherence to certain moral codes and ideals. But the events of the previous night had shown him that purity was not simply about following rules or maintaining appearances. It was about honesty, respect, and the courage to be oneself in the presence of another. Clara's assertiveness, which he had initially seen as challenging, was in fact an expression of that very purity, a purity of intention, authenticity, and self-respect. He realized that this understanding extended beyond their first night. It was a lesson that would shape every day of their married life. Jacob could no longer view love as a series of expectations to be fulfilled. Instead, it was a dynamic, evolving experience, one that required attention, care, and empathy. Clara had given him the gift of perspective, showing him that love could coexist with independence, and that respect for one another's individuality was essential to lasting partnership. By mid-morning, Jacob decided to step outside. The ranch was alive with the sounds of nature, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional call of a bird from the horizon. He walked along the edge of the pasture, feeling the solid earth beneath his boots and the wind on his face. The world seemed both familiar and new, as if the lessons of the night had infused every detail with fresh significance. He thought about Clara again, imagining her laughter as they rode together, her thoughtful questions, and her unwavering presence. He felt a growing sense of admiration, respect, and love that was deeper and more complex than anything he had experienced before. The realization that he could not, and should not, control every aspect of their relationship did not frighten him as much as he had expected. Instead, it brought a sense of relief and anticipation. Life with Clara would be full of surprises, challenges, and learning, but it would also be rich, fulfilling, and deeply rewarding. Jacob's reflections eventually led him to another truth: that vulnerability was not weakness. For so long, he had associated strength with control, certainty, and adherence to tradition. But the night had shown him that true strength lay in openness, humility, and the willingness to face uncertainty with honesty. By allowing himself to be vulnerable with Clara, by sharing his fears, hopes, and uncertainties, he had begun to form a bond that was far more resilient than any constructed ideal. As the day continued, Jacob took small steps to integrate these insights into action. He prepared breakfast, moving quietly and deliberately, thinking about how he could create an environment that reflected mutual respect and care. When Clara joined him in the kitchen, he greeted her with a smile, feeling a newfound ease in her presence. Their conversation was natural, flowing effortlessly from the simple routines of daily life to reflections on the previous night. Jacob noticed that Clara's presence brought balance to his thoughts. She had a way of gently challenging assumptions, encouraging reflection, and fostering understanding. In her company, he felt both grounded and inspired, supported and stimulated. The initial shock and tension of their first night had given way to a sense of partnership, mutual growth, and shared purpose. As they ate breakfast together, Jacob realized how much had changed in a single night. He had entered the bedroom with rigid expectations, carrying the weight of tradition, ideals, and personal beliefs. Now he saw clearly that love was not about fulfilling a script. It was about presence, attention, and respect. Clara's assertiveness had revealed a new path, one in which partnership was a living, evolving experience rather than a static arrangement. By afternoon, Jacob felt a sense of peace and clarity that he had not anticipated. He walked through the fields, observing the rhythm of life on the ranch and reflecting on the lessons of the morning. Every detail seemed infused with meaning, from the way sunlight glimmered on the grass to the distant sound of horses moving across the plains. He realized that the first night and the reflections that followed had been a transformative experience. It had challenged him, expanded his understanding, and prepared him for a partnership built on mutual respect and authentic connection. Jacob understood that Clara had not diminished his ideals, she had enriched them. Her presence had forced him to confront his assumptions, to embrace uncertainty, and to recognize that love required flexibility, empathy, and shared responsibility. The experience of the night and the morning that followed had reshaped his understanding of marriage, intimacy, and personal growth. He knew that their life together would not always be easy, but it would be real, meaningful, and deeply fulfilling. As evening approached, Jacob returned to the house, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment and understanding. He found Clara in the living room, tending to small tasks with her usual calm efficiency. He watched her for a moment, appreciating her patience, confidence, and thoughtfulness. Their eyes met, and in that simple exchange, Jacob felt a profound sense of connection. Words were unnecessary, the mutual respect and understanding they had cultivated spoke volumes. That night, as the sun set, and the sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, Jacob reflected on the journey that had begun just 2 days earlier. He had entered marriage with a vision rooted in tradition, expectation, and personal ideals. But he had emerged with a deeper, more nuanced understanding of love. It was about presence, honesty, respect, and the courage to embrace another person fully. Clara had been the catalyst for that transformation, showing him that partnership required openness, patience, and the willingness to learn from one another. And in that moment, Jacob felt a sense of gratitude so profound that it left him nearly speechless. He realized that the emotional reckoning he had undergone was not a sign of weakness, but a necessary step toward growth, connection, and true understanding. The night and the day that followed had taught him that love was not a rigid ideal to be achieved, but a living, evolving experience to be shared. Jacob knew that challenges lay ahead, that misunderstandings and disagreements would arise, and that life would test them in ways he could not yet imagine. But he also knew that they had taken the first crucial step toward building a marriage founded on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. The emotional reckoning had been difficult, but it had also been enlightening, strengthening, and deeply human. And as he sat quietly, listening to the soft sounds of the ranch settling into night, Jacob felt a profound sense of hope. He understood that Clara's presence in his life was not a threat to his ideals, but a gift that had expanded his understanding of love, partnership, and personal growth. Together, they would face the challenges and joys of life, guided by honesty, empathy, and the courage to embrace each other fully. Jacob awoke early the next morning with a sense of calm he had never experienced before. The ranch was quiet, save for the distant lowing of cattle and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. The sun had not yet risen, and the world was painted in soft shades of gray and gold. He lay for a moment, thinking about the past 2 days, the wedding, the first night, and the emotional journey that had followed. Every moment had been transformative, every conversation and gesture teaching him lessons he could never have imagined. He thought of Clara. The memory of her presence brought a warmth to his chest, a comfort that was both grounding and invigorating. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, strong, confident, and assertive, yet kind, thoughtful, and deeply understanding. The events of the past night had shown him that love was not about control, tradition, or following a script. It was about mutual respect, openness, and embracing each other fully. Clara had challenged his expectations, but in doing so, she had guided him toward a deeper understanding of what it meant to be partners in life. Jacob rose quietly, careful not to disturb Clara, who was still asleep. He walked to the window and looked out over the fields. The morning light was just beginning to touch the tops of the hills, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. The ranch seemed alive with possibility, as if the world itself was affirming the lessons he had learned. Jacob felt a surge of gratitude, not just for Clara, but for the clarity and perspective she had brought into his life. He decided to prepare breakfast, wanting to start the day with a gesture of care. Cooking for Clara was something small, but it felt meaningful. As he moved around the kitchen, chopping vegetables and tending to the stove, he reflected on the changes he had undergone. The first night had been a confrontation with his own expectations, a challenge to his ideals, and a test of his ability to adapt. And yet it had been one of the most important experiences of his life. He had learned patience, empathy, and the value of listening. He had learned that love was not a prize to be earned through adherence to rules, but a living connection built on honesty, trust, and shared understanding. Clara joined him in the kitchen shortly after, her hair still slightly tousled from sleep, her eyes bright and alert. She smiled at him, and in that smile Jacob saw both reassurance and playful curiosity. He realized again how much he admired her presence, not just her beauty, but the strength, intelligence, and warmth that radiated from her. They spoke quietly as he continued preparing breakfast, sharing thoughts about the day ahead, and laughing softly at small jokes. There was a lightness to their interaction that had been absent in previous days, replaced now by a sense of shared comfort and mutual respect. Over the course of the morning, Jacob and Clara continued to navigate the rhythms of their new life together. They tended to chores on the ranch, riding horses through the fields and checking on livestock, all the while speaking openly about their experiences, hopes, and plans. Jacob noticed how naturally Clara took initiative, not in a way that demanded control, but in a way that complemented his own efforts and encouraged collaboration. She was thoughtful in her decisions, aware of the land, the animals, and the small details that made their shared life function smoothly. Jacob, in turn, found himself responding with patience and appreciation. He no longer felt the need to control every moment, nor did he feel challenged by Clara's independence. Instead, he felt a sense of partnership that was new and invigorating. He realized that the lessons of the first night had not ended. They were ongoing, shaping the way he approached every interaction, every decision, and every shared moment with Clara. The day was filled with small, meaningful experiences. They rode together to the edge of the property, watching the sun rise fully over the horizon. Jacob marveled at how natural it felt to share these moments with Clara, how easily laughter, conversation, and quiet reflection flowed between them. He thought about how much he had changed in just a few days. The rigidity of his expectations had softened, replaced by openness and a deeper understanding of love. Later, they worked together on repairs around the ranch. Jacob had always taken pride in his skills, in the ability to maintain the land and ensure everything ran smoothly. But Clara's presence brought a new perspective. She offered practical suggestions, noticed details he had overlooked, and approached tasks with both care and efficiency. Jacob felt a mix of admiration and humility. Her contributions did not diminish his own. They enhanced the experience, teaching him the value of collaboration and shared responsibility. Throughout the day, Jacob continued to reflect on the emotional journey that had begun the night before. He remembered the confusion, the uncertainty, and the tension he had felt. But he also remembered the moments of connection, the insights gained, and the sense of clarity that had emerged. He realized that emotional growth was not instantaneous. It was a process, built through observation, reflection, and experience. Clara had been a guide in this process, gently challenging him to see beyond his assumptions and embrace a fuller understanding of partnership. By afternoon, Jacob and Clara had settled under the shade of a large oak tree, taking a break from their work. They sat quietly for a moment, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch and the distant calls of birds. Jacob felt a profound sense of peace. He had learned that acceptance was not passive. It was active engagement, a conscious choice to honor and respect the other person's perspective, desires, and individuality. Clara's confidence had not been a threat to him, it had been a gift, a lesson in the richness of authentic connection. Jacob spoke softly, sharing his thoughts with Clara about how much he had learned over the past day. She listened attentively, her eyes reflecting both understanding and warmth. He expressed his gratitude for her honesty, her presence, and the way she had guided him toward a deeper comprehension of love. Clara smiled, acknowledging his words with a gentle nod. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. The exchange itself was a testament to the strength of their bond. As the evening approached, Jacob and Clara returned to the house, the ranch bathed in the soft golden light of sunset. They moved together with ease, a rhythm established through mutual understanding and shared purpose. Jacob felt a sense of accomplishment, not for the completion of tasks, but for the growth he had experienced, the lessons learned, and the deeper connection he now shared with Clara. Dinner was quiet and unhurried, filled with small conversations, laughter, and thoughtful reflections. Jacob noticed how naturally their dynamic had shifted from one of expectation to one of partnership. He no longer felt the pressure to lead or control. Instead, he felt the joy of collaboration, the comfort of trust, and the excitement of shared growth. Clara's presence had transformed the way he approached every moment, teaching him that love was not about domination or adherence to ideals, but about presence, respect, and the willingness to embrace one another fully. After dinner, they settled in the living room, the soft glow of lanterns creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. Jacob reflected on the past days, the excitement of the wedding, the challenges and surprises of the first night, and the clarity gained in the hours since. He realized that transformation was not a single moment but a continuous process, and that acceptance, understanding, and love were cultivated through shared experiences, patience, and empathy. Jacob looked at Clara, seated beside him with a gentle smile, and felt a profound sense of connection. He understood that their journey together would not always be easy, that challenges and disagreements would arise, and that life would test them in ways they could not yet predict. But he also knew that the foundation they had built, through honesty, respect, and mutual understanding, would sustain them through every difficulty. The night settled around them, quiet and calm. Jacob felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment not only to the ideals he had grown up with, but also to the lessons Clara had taught him. He understood that love was not static. It was evolving, dynamic, and full of possibility. Clara's presence had expanded his understanding of what it meant to be a partner, a friend, and a companion. As they prepared for bed, Jacob felt a sense of anticipation for the future. The experiences of the past days had shown him that life with Clara would be filled with challenges, growth, and discovery. But it would also be filled with joy, connection, and the richness of shared understanding. He realized that the first night, though unexpected and challenging, had been the catalyst for this transformation. It had shown him the value of openness, honesty, and mutual respect. As they lay together that night, Jacob held Clara's hand and felt a sense of gratitude deeper than words could convey. He understood that the journey ahead would require patience, attentiveness, and a willingness to learn continuously. But he also knew that with Clara by his side, he was ready for whatever life would bring. Together, they would navigate the challenges and joys of marriage, building a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and love. Jacob reflected one last time before sleep claimed him. He realized that transformation was not just about change. It was about growth, understanding, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. Clara had not only challenged his assumptions, but had guided him toward a fuller, richer understanding of partnership. And in that realization, Jacob felt a profound sense of peace, readiness, and hope. The plains outside the ranch lay quiet, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The world seemed both familiar and new, reflecting the journey Jacob had undertaken within himself. He understood that the life ahead would be filled with lessons, surprises, and discoveries, but also with joy, companionship, and the fulfillment of shared dreams. And as he drifted into sleep, Jacob knew one thing with certainty. Their journey together had only just begun, but it was grounded in a foundation stronger than he had ever imagined. One built on love, respect, trust, and the willingness to embrace each other fully.